A trusted caregiver, a father's loving smile, a routine pickup. But when the real parent calls, 5-year-old Lily is gone. Who was the man, and where did he take her? Emma's intuition screams. Something is terrifyingly wrong. The scent of lukewarm milk and disinfectant still clung to the air in the little Sprouts daycare as the clock hand crawled towards 5 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, the 17th of October. Sunlight, weak and autumnal, slanted through the brightly painted windows, casting long, dancing shadows of cartoon giraffes and elephants onto the linoleum floor. Most of the children had already been collected, their cheerful, boisterous farewells fading into the usual end-of-day hum of tidying up. Emma Thompson, her dark ponytail swishing with efficient movements, was supervising the last 3 children in the main play area. At 32, with a decade of experience in early childhood education, Emma possessed a calm demeanor that rarely wavered, a comforting presence for both anxious parents and excitable toddlers. She prided herself on her meticulous attention to detail, the little quirks and preferences of each child under her care, catalogued in her mind with an almost maternal precision. Lily Parker, a bright 5-year-old with a halo of blonde curls and a penchant for mismatched socks, was meticulously arranging a family of plastic dinosaurs on a miniature felt volcano, her tongue poked out from the corner of her mouth in concentration. She was usually picked up by her mother, Sarah, a kind woman with a perpetually harried look, or occasionally her father, Mark, whose booming laugh always preceded him. Today, however, was different. The chime above the daycare's main entrance jingled, a familiar sound that usually signaled a happy reunion. Emma looked up, a welcoming smile already forming on her lips. A man stood in the doorway, with neatly combed brown hair and unassuming features. He wore a simple navy jacket and carried a worn leather briefcase. He wasn't Mark Parker. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice pleasant, if a little quiet. "I'm here for Lily Parker. I'm David Miller, her father." Emma's smile faltered fractionally. David Miller? She consulted the pickup authorization list pinned discreetly behind her desk, her eyes scanning the names. Sarah Parker, Mark Parker. No David Miller. Standard procedure dictated she ask for ID if the person wasn't on the list or immediately recognizable. "Oh, right," the man said, as if suddenly remembering. "Sarah, my wife," she was supposed to call. Things got a bit hectic at her work, a last-minute emergency. She asked if I could step in. Mark, her ex-husband, is out of town on business, I believe. He offered a sheepish, almost boyish grin. "We're relatively new to this co-parenting schedule adjustment. It's Lily's mum, Sarah, who usually handles daycare." His explanation seemed plausible. Co-parenting arrangements could be fluid, and last-minute changes weren't unheard of. Emma had seen her share of flustered parents juggling work and childcare. However, a prickle of unease, a tiny, almost imperceptible alarm bell, sounded in the back of her mind. "Mr. Miller, for new pickup authorizations, we usually require prior notification from the registered guardian, or for them to add you to the list in person." He nodded understandingly. "Absolutely, I get it. Security is paramount. Sarah did say she'd try to call, but her meeting was with the CEO. A real dragon, apparently. She might not have had a chance." "Look." He fumbled in his jacket pocket and produced a wallet, flipping it open to show a driver's license. David Miller. "And," he pulled out his phone, "I have a picture of Lily and me from her birthday last month." He swiped the screen, showing a photo of himself with Lily, both smiling, a brightly colored birthday cake between them. Lily was wearing a sparkly tiara. Emma leaned closer. The man in the photo was undeniably him. Lily looked happy. The photo felt recent. Still, the protocol. "Just one moment," Emma said, maintaining her professional tone. "Let me try calling Mrs. Parker to confirm." Of course, David Miller agreed readily, his expression open and cooperative. "Please do. Her direct line might be busy, though." Emma dialed Sarah Parker's mobile number. It rang, each trill heightening the slight tension in the room, before clicking over to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Sarah. I can't get to the phone right now." Emma disconnected, a small frown etching itself between her brows. She tried Sarah's work number, the one listed on their files. It also went to voicemail after several rings. David Miller watched her, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "See? Told you. That meeting." He sighed softly. "Look, Lily knows me. Ask her. Lily, hearing her name, had abandoned her dinosaurs and was now peering around the corner of a bookshelf, her blue eyes wide. "Daddy?" she said, a small, questioning note in her voice. But it wasn't directed at the man. She seemed to be looking past him, towards the door, as if expecting someone else. Then she looked at David Miller. Her expression was hard to read. Not fear, not exactly. More like a cautious curiosity, perhaps a touch of confusion. Children often reacted unexpectedly to less frequent visitors or changes in routine. "Hey, Munchkin," David Miller said, his voice suddenly warmer, more paternal. He crouched down, opening his arms. "Mommy got held up, so I'm on rescue duty today. Ready to go build that epic pillow fort we talked about?" Lily tilted her head. "Pillow fort?" she echoed, still hesitant. She took a tentative step forward, then another. Emma watched the interaction intently. The pillow fort comment seemed to resonate. Maybe this was a familiar promise between them. The photograph, his calm demeanor, Lily's lack of overt distress, it was all chipping away at Emma's initial reservation. The day was ending, she was tired, and the other two children were getting restless. The system had failed if Sarah hadn't called, but he seemed genuine. "Okay, Mr. Miller," Emma said, making a decision that would later haunt her waking moments and fill her nightmares. "Let me just get her things." She retrieved Lily's small backpack, adorned with a smiling cartoon sun, and her art project from the day, a rather abstract painting of what Lily had declared was a rainbow unicorn eating spaghetti. David Miller signed Lily out on the register, his signature a series of quick, illegible loops. Emma noticed he used a rather expensive-looking fountain pen, the ink a deep, almost black, blue, an odd detail, but insignificant at the time. He helped Lily with her backpack, his movements gentle. "Say bye-bye to Miss Emma, sweet pea." "Bye, Miss Emma," Lily said, her voice small. She didn't make eye contact, her gaze fixed on the floor before she allowed David Miller to take her hand. He gave Emma a final, grateful nod, and then they were gone, the chime of the door sounding with a chilling finality. For a few minutes, an almost unnatural quiet settled over the daycare. Emma finished tidying, her mind already shifting to the next day's activities. The unease had mostly dissipated, replaced by the low-level exhaustion of a long day. Then, at precisely 10 minutes past 5, the phone rang. Emma answered. "Little Sprouts Daycare." Emma speaking. "Emma, hi, it's Sarah Parker. So sorry my phone died earlier, and I just got out of a nightmare meeting. Is Mark there yet to pick up Lily? He said he was running a bit late." The world tilted. Emma's blood ran cold, a glacial wave washing over her. Her hand tightened on the receiver, her knuckles white. "Sarah," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Mark?" "But," Lily left about 15 minutes ago. With her father, David Miller. He said you sent him." A beat of stunned silence. Then Sarah's voice, sharp with a confusion that was rapidly morphing into terror. "David Miller? Emma, I don't know any David Miller. Mark is Lily's father. He's on his way." "Who is David Miller? Where is my daughter?" The question hung in the air, monstrous and terrifying. Emma's carefully constructed composure shattered. The image of David Miller's bland face, his plausible explanations, the photograph, Lily's hesitant but compliant departure, it all replayed in her mind with horrifying clarity. The expensive fountain pen, Lily's quiet daddy, directed at no one. Panic, raw and visceral, clawed at Emma's throat. She had handed a child, her child in her care, to a stranger. A man who had, with chilling ease, walked out of the daycare and into the fading afternoon light with 5-year-old Lily Parker. Who was he? Why had he taken Lily? How had he known so much? About Sarah's work, Mark being out of town, which Sarah just confirmed he wasn't, even a recent photo. The questions began to swarm, each one more horrifying than the last, as the full, sickening weight of what had just transpired crashed down upon Emma Thompson. The bright, cheerful daycare suddenly felt like a crime scene, and the biggest question of all screamed in the sudden, deafening silence. Where was Lily? Sarah Parker's raw, anguished cry of, "Where is my daughter?" echoed in Emma Thompson's ears long after the phone line had gone dead, or perhaps after Emma's trembling hand had lost its grip and the receiver had clattered onto the desk. For a frozen eternity, Emma simply stared at it, the plastic innocuous, yet now a conduit of unimaginable horror. The vibrant colors of the daycare, the cheerful yellows, the calming blues, the playful greens, seemed to leach away, replaced by a suffocating monochrome dread. Her lungs burned, and she realized she hadn't taken a proper breath since Sarah's denial had shattered her world. Emma was, by nature, a planner, a list maker, a woman who found solace in order and predictability. Her classroom was a testament to this. Toy bins labeled in neat, block letters, art supplies arranged by color, a daily schedule adhered to with gentle but firm consistency. Her life outside Little Sprouts was similarly structured: yoga on Tuesdays, book club on Thursdays, a quiet, meticulously kept apartment that was her sanctuary. This methodical approach extended to her care of the children. She knew their allergies, their favorite stories, the subtle shift in their expressions that signaled an impending tantrum or a burgeoning friendship. It was this very attentiveness, this ingrained sense of responsibility, that now became a source of searing self-reproach. How could she, Emma Thompson, who prided herself on seeing the smallest details, have missed something so catastrophically large? The first coherent thought that pierced through the fog of panic was, "Call the police." Her fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with her mobile phone, nearly dropping it twice. When she finally managed to dial 911, her voice was a ragged, choked thing she barely recognized. She relayed the information. Abduction. Little Sprouts Daycare. 5-year-old Lily Parker. A man named David Miller, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. While waiting for the police, a frantic, desperate energy seized her. She scrambled for the sign-out sheet, her eyes darting to the name David Miller and the scrawled signature beside it. The expensive fountain pen. Why had that detail lodged in her memory? It was so out of place with his otherwise unremarkable appearance. She tried to recall every nuance of his face, his voice, his clothes: navy jacket plain, brown hair, neatly combed. No scars, no tattoos, nothing distinctive. He was a ghost, a phantom who had materialized out of thin air and then vanished with the most precious thing in the world. The daycare owner, Mrs. Gable, a kindly woman in her late 60s, arrived within minutes of Emma's panicked call to her, her face ashen. Together they waited, the silence in the now empty daycare pressing in on them, heavy and accusatory. The remnants of the day's play, a half-finished block tower, a crayon drawing of a lopsided sun, Lily's forgotten art project still pinned to the display board, seemed to mock Emma. The rainbow unicorn eating spaghetti painting, so full of innocent whimsy just hours ago, now felt like a punch to the gut. Lily's vibrant imagination, her joyful spirit, all of it had been entrusted to Emma, and Emma had failed. The arrival of the first police officers, a young patrolman and his more seasoned partner, was a blur of clipped questions and urgent radio chatter. Emma recounted the afternoon's events, her voice trembling, tears stinging her eyes but refusing to fall. She felt a desperate need to be precise, to offer some fragment of information that might help, but her mind kept replaying the scene. David Miller's calm deception, her own fatal misjudgment. She described him as best she could. The photo on his phone, his story about Sarah's meeting. The officers exchanged a grim look. Mark and Sarah Parker arrived shortly after, their faces masks of disbelief and anguish. Sarah was almost catatonic with grief, supported by Mark, whose initial stunned silence had given way to a barely suppressed rage, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for someone to blame, his gaze eventually landing on Emma. The accusation in his eyes, though unspoken, was a physical blow. Emma didn't flinch. She deserved it. She would have given anything to rewind the clock, to refuse David Miller entry, to trust that nagging, almost imperceptible whisper of doubt. "How could you?" Sarah finally whispered, her voice hoarse, tears streaming down her face. "You're supposed to keep them safe. We trusted you." I am so sorry," Emma stammered, the words woefully inadequate. "He had a photo. He knew things. I tried to call you." Her excuses sounded hollow even to her own ears. The Parkers weren't interested in excuses. They wanted their daughter. The loss was multifaceted, a gaping wound in the fabric of their lives. For Lily, it was the terrifying loss of safety, of familiar faces, the sudden, inexplicable wrenching from everything she knew. For her parents, It was the ultimate nightmare, the sudden, violent theft of their child, their future. For Emma, it was a devastating trifecta: the loss of a child under her care, the shattering of her professional identity, and the erosion of the trust she had painstakingly built with the families at Little Sprouts. Her meticulously ordered world had imploded. Detectives arrived, their questions more pointed, more probing. Detective Harding, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, led the questioning of Emma. Emma recounted everything again: the fountain pen, Lily's hesitant daddy, the detail about the pillow fort. Each memory was a fresh stab of guilt. Had Lily been trying to tell her something with that questioning daddy? Had she been subtly signaling her unease? Emma's expertise in child behavior seemed to have deserted her when it mattered most. The timeline became crucial. David Miller had left with Lily at approximately 4:55 p.m. Sarah Parker had called at 5:10 p.m. A 15-minute window, 15 minutes for a man to disappear with a child in a busy city. The police immediately issued an Amber Alert. Lily's smiling school photo now flashing on news reports. Her description: blonde hair, blue eyes, last seen wearing a pink t-shirt and blue leggings, broadcast to a city suddenly holding its breath. As the evening wore on, the daycare transformed into a makeshift command center. Emma, though repeatedly told she could go home, couldn't bring herself to leave. She sat huddled on a small plastic chair, Lily's unicorn painting now clutched in her hands, its cheerful colors a stark contrast to the despair that consumed her. What was lost was not just a child, but innocence. The innocence of the other children who would come to daycare tomorrow, unaware of the shadow that now loomed over their bright, happy place. The innocence of parents who believed their children were unequivocally safe. Emma's mind, usually a wellspring of creative solutions and calm logic, was now a torment of what-ifs. What if she had insisted on waiting until she reached Sarah? What if she had trusted her initial gut feeling? That tiny, insistent voice she had so expertly silenced with logic and plausible explanations. Her caregiver's instinct, honed over years, had been there, a faint alarm, but she hadn't listened. The hours ticked by, each one a fresh wave of agony. News crews began to gather outside, their vans and cameras a stark reminder of the public dimension of this private tragedy. Emma felt exposed, judged. She was the one who had opened the door. She was the one who had let Lily go. The what was lost was profound. It was the carefree laughter of a 5-year-old girl, the peace of mind of her parents, the reputation of a daycare, and for Emma Thompson, it was the very core of who she believed herself to be. A protector, a caregiver, a safe harbor. Now, she was none of those things. She was just the woman who had failed Lily Parker. And as the night deepened, cold and starless, the weight of that failure threatened to crush her entirely. The question wasn't just where Lily was, but how Emma could ever live with herself if she wasn't found. The memory of David Miller's polite smile was now a grotesque mask, hiding an unimaginable darkness. The dawn of Wednesday, the 18th of October, brought no comfort, only a raw grey light that seemed to expose the city's weariness and Emma's own frayed nerves. Less than 12 hours had passed since Lily Parker had been spirited away, but an eternity of fear and self-recrimination had already etched itself onto Emma's soul. The initial adrenaline surge that had propelled her through the first horrifying hours with the police had ebbed, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a sickening sense of dread. She hadn't slept, her mind replaying David Miller's calm, deceitful face, every exchanged word, every missed signal, on a torturous loop. Detective Harding had arranged to meet Emma back at Little Sprouts Daycare mid-morning. The daycare was closed, a stark, temporarily closed sign hastily taped to the door, a decision made by a flustered Mrs. Gable after a brief early morning call with the daycare chain's regional manager, a Mr. Henderson. His voice, relayed through Mrs. Gable, had been less concerned with Lily's immediate welfare and more with protocol adherence, liability containment, and the brand image. The implication, unspoken but heavily present, was that Emma's lapse was now a significant problem for the corporation. When Emma arrived, the cheerful facade of Little Sprouts felt like a grotesque mockery. The fingerprint dust, a fine grey powder coating surfaces near the entrance and the sign-out sheet, was a stark reminder that this place of laughter and learning was now, officially, a crime scene. Detective Harding was already there, nursing a lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, her expression as unreadable as the previous night. Another detective, a younger man named Officer Davies, was meticulously re-examining the sign-out book. "Miss Thompson," Harding began, her tone professional but devoid of any warmth, "we need to go over your statement again. Specifically, the interaction with Miller. Every detail, no matter how insignificant it seemed at the time." Emma nodded, her throat tight. She recounted the story, the words feeling worn and heavy with each repetition. She emphasized the photograph David Miller had shown, him and Lily, the birthday cake. The photo looked genuine, recent. He called her Munchkin. He mentioned a pillow fort. Harding made a note. The Parkers confirmed Lily had a birthday last month. They don't recall any photos taken with a David Miller, nor any specific pillow fort promise with anyone outside the immediate family. Miller was clearly well informed. Her gaze was steady, appraising. "You mentioned he used a fountain pen to sign out. Can you describe it?" "It looked expensive," Emma said, grasping at the detail. "Dark, maybe black or a very deep blue. Silver clip, I think. The ink was a dark blue, too." Officer Davies looked up. "The lab is analyzing the signature for any anomalies in the ink or pressure, but a common fountain pen type won't give us much unless it's exceptionally rare or we find it on a suspect." His tone suggested it was a minor, almost trivial detail. The system, it seemed, was more interested in broad strokes than Emma's desperate fragments. "And his demeanor?" Harding pressed. "You said he was calm, plausible." "Yes, almost practiced," Emma offered, a new thought surfacing, like he knew the answers before I asked the questions. "When I said I'd call Sarah Parker, he agreed too readily, even warned me her line might be busy, as if he knew it would be. Had he somehow ensured Sarah wouldn't be reachable?" The thought sent a fresh chill through her. Harding simply nodded. "We're looking into any possible connections he might have to the Parkers, disgruntled former employee of theirs, distant relative, someone holding a grudge. So far, nothing concrete. Mark Parker is in finance. Sarah Parker is a marketing executive. Their lives are, by all accounts, quite ordinary." The detective's pragmatic approach, while necessary for the investigation, felt like a subtle dismissal of the sheer terror of the situation. There was an undercurrent, a faint but perceptible current of scrutiny directed at Emma herself. Questions about daycare policy, the exact wording of the pickup authorization rules, how often she personally verified unfamiliar faces. Each question, while standard procedure, felt like a tiny barb, reinforcing her failure. Later that day, Mrs. Gable called Emma. Her voice was strained. "Emma, dear, Mr. Henderson from corporate. He's decided it's best if you take a leave of absence. Effective immediately. Paid, of course," she added hastily, "until this is resolved. For your own well-being," he said. "And, well, for the daycare's operations once we reopen." The euphemisms hung heavy in the air. "For my well-being" was code for your reliability. Emma understood. Her presence would be a constant reminder of the breach, a focal point for parental anxiety, for media scrutiny. She was being quietly sidelined, the system protecting itself. The injustice of it stung, but it was nothing compared to the agony of Lily's absence. News reports had, as expected, seized upon the story. Lily's sweet, smiling face was everywhere, juxtaposed with grainy CCTV stills of David Miller, his features frustratingly indistinct, walking away from the daycare, Lily's small hand in his. Some reports were sympathetic. Others, particularly in the anonymous viper pit of online comment sections, were less so. "How could the teacher be so stupid?" one read. "Parents pay for security, not negligence," said another. Emma's name hadn't been officially released to the wider media yet, but it was only a matter of time. The daycare community was small. Whispers would travel. Days bled into one another. Tuesday, the 17th of October, the day of the abduction. Wednesday, the 18th, the start of Emma's forced leave. Thursday, the 19th. The police held daily press briefings, always formal, always tight-lipped. "We are pursuing all available leads," Detective Harding would state, her expression grim. "The investigation is ongoing, but there was no news of Lily, no ransom demand, nothing, just a terrifying, expanding silence." Mark and Sarah Parker made a tearful public appeal, their faces gaunt with sleeplessness and despair. Sarah clutched Lily's favorite stuffed rabbit, its ears worn smooth from affection. Watching them on the local news from the isolation of her apartment, Emma felt a fresh wave of guilt, so profound it was physically nauseating. Their pain was a direct consequence of her actions. On Friday, the 20th of October, Emma received a call from Officer Davies. "Miss Thompson, we've been trying to enhance the photograph David Miller showed you, the one on his phone. You mentioned Lily was wearing a sparkly tiara." "Yes, that's right," Emma said, a flicker of hope igniting. "And there was a cake. The Parkers provided us with all their photos from Lily's recent birthday party. There are several of Lily in a tiara, with her cake, but in none of them is there a man resembling your description of David Miller. In fact," Davies paused, "the background in their photos, the decorations, the type of cake, it's all slightly different from what you recall seeing on Miller's phone, isn't it?" Emma's mind raced. She tried to reconstruct the image from Miller's phone. The lighting, had it been slightly off? Had Lily's smile been a little too fixed? "The cake. I thought it was the same," she stammered, doubt creeping in. "But it happened so fast. He only showed it to me for a few seconds." "We believe the photograph Miller showed you was a fabrication, Miss Thompson," Davies said, his voice flat. "Likely a digitally altered image, or a carefully staged one. He didn't just know details about Lily. He came prepared with counterfeit legitimacy. A fabrication." The realization hit Emma with the force of a physical blow. Miller hadn't just been an opportunist. He was a meticulous planner, a predator who had researched his prey and crafted his disguise with chilling precision. The system, in this instance the police forensic work, had revealed a new layer of his deception. But this revelation also highlighted the terrifying sophistication they were up against. This wasn't some impulsive act. This was calculated. The police were doing their job, following procedures, analyzing evidence. But the sheer scale of the search, the methodical, often slow-moving nature of the investigation, felt agonizingly inadequate against the swift, cunning actions of David Miller. He had a 3-day head start. Every passing hour felt like a victory for him, another grain of hope slipping through their fingers. The ambiguity of the system was also apparent in the subtle shift in how even Mrs. Gable spoke to her. The initial shared shock had been replaced by a careful distance, her words chosen with caution. The daycare chain wanted this to go away. The police wanted a lead, any lead, but the city was vast, and Miller had vanished as if into thin air. Public sympathy was a fickle thing, already showing signs of waning as no new, dramatic developments emerged. Emma felt increasingly isolated. The official channels seemed to be grinding forward with a ponderous, impersonal momentum. The focus was on procedure, on evidence that could stand up in court, on managing public perception. But where was the raw, urgent desperation for Lily? It was there in her parents, certainly. It consumed Emma. But the system had other cases, other priorities. Lily Parker was a file, an Amber Alert, a series of procedural steps. And as the 4th day since Lily's disappearance began, Saturday, the 21st of October, Emma realized with a chilling certainty that if Lily was to be found, waiting for the system to work might not be enough. The photograph, that faked, manipulative image, became a new focal point for her anguish. It wasn't just a lie, it was a carefully constructed weapon, and it had worked perfectly. The forced leave of absence had plunged Emma Thompson into a disorienting limbo. Her meticulously structured life had been replaced by endless, agonizing hours spent within the 4 walls of her small apartment. Sleep offered no escape, only a canvas for vivid, tormenting replays of David Miller's deceptively bland face and Lily Parker's hesitant departure. The news reports had dwindled in frequency, Lily's smiling image replaced by the next day's tragedies and triumphs. It was Sunday, the 22nd of October, 5 days since Lily vanished, and the silence from the police was deafening. The official investigation felt like a distant, impersonal machine grinding slowly onward, while Emma was trapped in a vortex of guilt and a desperate, gnawing need to do something. The revelation about the faked photograph had been a turning point, shifting her despair into a restless, almost obsessive focus. Miller hadn't just been lucky, he had been forensically aware, cunning. Emma found herself replaying the brief moments of his presence at the daycare, not as a passive victim of his deceit, but as an analyst searching for the overlooked flaw in his performance. Her apartment, usually a haven of calm, became a war room of scattered thoughts and half-remembered details. She'd taken to sketching, an old habit from her college days. Not pictures of Lily, that was too painful. Instead, she drew David Miller's face from memory, again and again, trying to capture the subtle nuances that her initial shock might have obscured. The neat brown hair. Was it too neat? Perhaps a wig? The unremarkable features. Were they unremarkable by design, deliberately chosen to be forgettable? She drew his navy jacket, his plain trousers, the worn leather briefcase he carried. What was in that briefcase? Why bring a briefcase to a child abduction? It was while sketching the briefcase for the 10th time, her pencil hovering over the clasp, that a flicker of memory, sharp and distinct, pierced through the fog. The fountain pen. She had told Detective Harding about its expensive appearance. But there was something else, something she hadn't consciously registered until this very moment. When Miller had signed Lily out, he'd placed the briefcase flat on the reception counter. For a fleeting second, as he'd reached inside for the pen, the clasp had been undone, and the briefcase had gaped open slightly. Emma hadn't been looking directly into it. Her attention focused on his hands, on the pen itself. But her peripheral vision, she closed her eyes, concentrating fiercely, trying to rebuild the scene in her mind's eye. The angle, the lighting from the overhead fluorescent tubes. It wasn't what was in the briefcase that struck her now, but something on it, or rather, missing from it. Most briefcases, especially older leather ones, had some sort of identifying mark. A scuff, a scratch, a maker's logo subtly embossed, perhaps initials. Miller's briefcase, in that brief glimpse, had seemed perfectly anonymous. Smooth, unblemished, dark leather, no discernible logos. It was as nondescript as he was, another piece of his carefully constructed camouflage. But there was more. The pen. He'd fished it out. She remembered the glint of silver from the clip. But before he'd taken it out, he'd fumbled slightly, his fingers brushing against something else inside. A small, rectangular object. At the time, she'd assumed it was just the usual clutter one keeps in a briefcase. Now, focusing on that fleeting image, a new detail swam into focus. It was a small plastic box, the kind that might hold business cards? Or perhaps, more chillingly, blank ID cards. The thought was a jolt. Then came another memory, triggered by the first. The photograph on his phone. He'd swiped the screen to show it to her. She'd focused on Lily, on his face beside her. But the phone itself? What kind of phone was it? She wasn't a tech expert, but she was an observant person. It had been a smartphone, yes, but not the latest model, not an iPhone or a high-end Android she recognized from parents at the daycare. It was slightly thicker, perhaps, with a casing that was plain black, again, utterly unremarkable. And the screen protector. It had been slightly misaligned, a tiny air bubble trapped near one edge. A small imperfection in an otherwise flawless deception. These details, in isolation, meant little, but pieced together, the generic phone, the possibly doctored photo displayed on it, the anonymous briefcase, the expensive but untraceable-looking fountain pen, the potential box of blank cards. They painted a picture of someone who was not just an imposter, but a professional, someone who specialized in creating false identities, someone who understood the power of appearing utterly ordinary, utterly forgettable. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Could David Miller be more than just a kidnapper? Was he involved in something larger, something more organized? The police were looking for connections to the Parkers, a personal motive. But what if there wasn't one? What if Lily had been targeted for reasons entirely unrelated to her parents' everyday lives? The pillow fort comment. He'd used it to connect with Lily. Ready to go build that epic pillow fort we talked about? His words. Emma had assumed it was something familiar to Lily. But what if it wasn't? Lily had echoed. Pillow fort. With that hesitant, questioning tone, Emma had dismissed it as childish shyness. But what if Lily's hesitation hadn't been shyness, but genuine confusion because she'd never discussed a pillow fort with this man? Perhaps he'd overheard Lily talking about pillow forts with her actual father, or with friends at daycare, and had twisted it for his own use. He had to have been observing Lily, perhaps for days, even weeks. How else could he have obtained a photo to alter, or known her routine? The daycare's location. Little Sprouts was situated on a relatively quiet side street, but it was only 2 blocks from a major bus terminal and 3 blocks from a highway on-ramp. Easy access, easy escape. Emma had never thought of it that way before. It was just convenient for parents. Now, that convenience felt sinister. Driven by a desperate urgency, Emma started to search online, not for news about Lily, which was always the same painful non-update, but for information on child abductions by strangers, on methods used by professional criminals. She learned about the meticulous planning involved, the surveillance, the creation of plausible backstories. She read about the use of seemingly innocuous props to disarm victims and witnesses. The articles mirrored, with horrifying accuracy, David Miller's actions. She remembered his hands. Clean, well-kept, no calluses, not the hands of a manual laborer. His language had been polite, educated. He'd said my wife, Sarah, and then corrected himself to say Mark was the ex-husband, a subtle way of embedding himself into the family narrative. He'd even known Mark was supposedly out of town, a piece of misinformation he'd used to bolster his story, perhaps banking on the fact that Emma wouldn't be able to immediately verify it, or that in the rush of the end of the day, she might not even try if Mark was the less frequent pickup parent. Suddenly, another memory surfaced, so fleeting she'd almost missed its significance entirely. While David Miller was signing the register, his jacket had ridden up slightly at the back. For a split second, Emma had seen a glimpse of something tucked into the waistband of his trousers. It was dark, a small, flat shape. At the time, her brain, overloaded and stressed, hadn't processed it. Now, with chilling clarity, she wondered, could it have been a restraint, zip ties, or something worse? The thought made her physically ill. These weren't just random recollections anymore. They were pieces of a puzzle, dark and terrifying, slowly slotting into place. David Miller wasn't just a deceptive man. He was a phantom, an expert in blending in exploiting trust. The system was looking for a man with a name and a past connected to the Parkers. But what if David Miller was just one of many names, one of many faces this man could wear? Emma knew she had to tell Detective Harding about these coalescing thoughts, these fragmented memories that were now forming a more coherent, more alarming picture. The fountain pen, the briefcase, the phone, the possible box of cards, the misaligned screen protector, the glimpse of something at his waistband, the potential surveillance. These weren't just the ramblings of a guilt-ridden caregiver. These were observations, details, the kind of details she was trained to notice in children, but had failed to apply critically to an adult. The truth, or at least a more horrifying dimension of it, was beginning to emerge from the recesses of her memory. David Miller was far more dangerous, far more prepared than anyone had initially realized. And he hadn't just taken Lily, he had erased himself with chilling efficiency. The challenge wasn't just finding Lily, it was unmasking a ghost. Monday, the 23rd of October. 6 days had passed since Lily Parker was stolen from Little Sprouts Daycare. 6 days of a suffocating silence from the abductor, 6 days of dwindling hope for her parents, and 6 days of Emma Thompson methodically dissecting her own memories, searching for the key that might unlock the nightmare. Armed with her unsettling constellation of fragmented recollections, the anonymous briefcase, the oddly generic phone with its misaligned screen protector, the potential box of blank cards, the expensive but nondescript fountain pen, and the chilling glimpse of something tucked into Miller's waistband, Emma knew she couldn't keep them to herself any longer. The official investigation was looking for a David Miller connected to the Parkers. Emma was increasingly convinced they needed to be looking for a ghost, a professional chameleon. She called Detective Harding's direct line, her hand surprisingly steady. "Detective Harding, it's Emma Thompson. I need to talk to you. I've remembered some things, details about Miller, about his belongings. They might seem small, but I think they're important." Harding's voice on the other end was weary, the strain of a high-profile, fruitless search evident. "Miss Thompson, we have your statement. If you recall anything significant that was missed—" "It is significant," Emma interrupted, a new firmness in her tone that surprised even herself. "It's about the items he carried, the way he presented himself. It's not just what he did, but how he was equipped to do it. The photo he showed me was likely a fabrication. I believe he's a professional, someone who manufactures identities." There was a pause. Emma could almost hear Harding weighing the possibilities, a distraught witness grasping at straws, or someone whose unique proximity to the perpetrator might have captured overlooked clues. "All right, Miss Thompson," Harding said finally, her voice still cautious. "Can you come down to the station? Say, in an hour?" At the precinct, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the bright, if now tainted, colors of Little Sprouts. Grey walls, the smell of stale coffee and bureaucracy, the constant hum of activity that nonetheless felt devoid of any immediate progress in Lily's case. Emma was led to a small, sterile interview room. Detective Harding entered, carrying a notepad, Officer Davies trailing her. Emma laid out her observations, one by one, her voice clear and precise. She described the briefcase, its utter lack of identifying marks, the glimpse of the small plastic box inside. She detailed the plain phone with the poorly applied screen protector. She mentioned the expensive fountain pen again, emphasizing its generic design despite its apparent quality, and the dark blue ink. Finally, hesitantly, she described the dark, flat object she'd glimpsed at his waistband. Harding listened, her expression unreadable at first. Officer Davies jotted notes, occasionally glancing up. When Emma finished, there was a heavy silence. "A professional, you think?" Harding said, her gaze sharp. "Based on a plain briefcase and a cheap phone?" "It's the combination of things," Emma insisted. "The fabricated photo, the meticulously unremarkable appearance, the items that could all be used to support a false identity. That box, what if it held blank ID cards? What if the briefcase was chosen because it couldn't be easily traced back to a manufacturer or a previous owner? The pen, elegant but not flashy, not memorable. He was a ghost." Harding tapped her pen on her notepad. "The pen you described? You said the ink was a dark, almost black blue." "Yes," Emma confirmed. "Very dark blue." Harding exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance with Davies. "We did recover a partial latent print from the sign-out sheet, not Miller's, we think, but near his signature. The lab also analyzed the ink from the signature itself. It was a high-quality, water-resistant document ink, German-made, fairly common among enthusiasts, but not your average Bic. But it's the lack of defining features on his other items that stands out," Emma pressed on, feeling a surge of frustration. Were they dismissing her? Then Officer Davies spoke, his tone suddenly more animated. "The misaligned screen protector on the phone, that's interesting. People who use burner phones, disposables, often don't bother with perfect application of accessories if they apply them at all, or they buy them cheap, pre-packaged that way." Harding leaned forward slightly. "Miss Thompson, the briefcase you described, you said it gaped open slightly when he reached for the pen. Did you happen to see any lining, any specific color or pattern?" Emma closed her eyes, dredging her memory again. "The interior, just a glimpse. It was dark," she said slowly. "Plain, I think. No distinct pattern. But, wait, a tiny detail surfaced, something she hadn't even realized she'd logged. There was a faint scent, not leather, more like a chemical. A faint, clean, almost sterile smell. Not unpleasant, just out of place for an old leather briefcase." Harding's eyes narrowed. She looked at Davies again, a silent communication passing between them. Davies nodded almost imperceptibly. "Miss Thompson," Harding said, her voice now carrying a different weight, a new intensity. "A few months ago, intelligence from an international human trafficking task force mentioned a subject known only by a code name, the Curator. This individual is believed to be a facilitator, specializing in creating untraceable identities and logistical support for moving high-value assets, children, across borders. One of his alleged trademarks is the use of nondescript, often modified, luggage or briefcases that are chemically treated to eliminate any trace evidence, like DNA or fingerprints from previous handlers. The sterile smell you mentioned." Emma felt a cold shock. "The Curator? He's a ghost, much like you described Miller," Harding continued. "Few confirmed sightings, no known photographs that are definitely him. His operatives are meticulously prepared. The faked photo of Miller with Lily, that's consistent with the level of preparatory work. We had discounted a trafficking angle initially because there was no immediate ransom, no prior indicators with the Parkers. But if Miller isn't acting alone, if he's an operative for someone like the Curator, The room seemed to shrink. The implications were terrifying. Lily wasn't just taken by a lone deviant. She might be in the hands of a sophisticated, international criminal organization. "The fountain pen ink," Davies interjected, looking at his notes. "The German brand you indirectly pointed to, while common, was flagged in a separate, much colder missing child case 3 years ago in Oregon. The abductor in that case also used a similar type of untraceable briefcase and showed a photograph to the child's nanny. The case went cold. We never linked it to anything larger." Suddenly, Emma's observations, her caregiver's instinct for detail, were no longer the desperate graspings of a traumatized witness. They were critical pieces of intelligence, connecting disparate, horrifying dots. The twist wasn't just that Miller was a professional, it was that he was potentially a cog in a much larger, more sinister machine, one the police had only vaguely been aware of on a theoretical level. Emma's meticulous memory of seemingly innocuous details, the smell of a briefcase lining, the ink in a pen, a misaligned screen protector, had provided the first tangible link, the first potential crack in the curator's shadowy operation. Harding stood up abruptly. "Davies, get on the line with the federal task force. Relay Miss Thompson's new information, specifically the briefcase description, the sterile scent, the possible box of blank IDs, and cross-reference the Oregon case ink. See if the curator profile has any mention of associates matching Miller's general appearance or MO. We need to look at all CCTV from a 5-block radius of the daycare, not just the immediate vicinity. If he was being picked up or met someone." The atmosphere in the room had transformed. The weariness was replaced by a grim, focused energy. Emma, who had walked in feeling like a pariah, now felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in days, a terrifying, razor-edged hope. Her failure had been monumental, but her memory, the very faculty she'd berated for not seeing enough, might now be the key to unlocking something far bigger, far more dangerous, but also, perhaps, a path to Lily. "Miss Thompson," Harding said, turning back to her, her expression now one of professional respect rather than mere tolerance. "You may have just given us our first real break. Your eye for detail, it's remarkable. This David Miller, or whatever his real name is, he's not just a kidnapper, he's a specialist, and specialists have patterns, weaknesses. You've helped us see a pattern we were missing. The event that reversed the situation wasn't a dramatic shootout or a sudden confession. It was the quiet, painstaking reconstruction of memory, the linking of tiny, overlooked details by a daycare teacher whose world had been shattered. The object as witness wasn't one thing but several. The anonymous briefcase whose very sterility was a clue, the common pen whose ink told a silent story across states and years, the cheap phone whose imperfection hinted at a disposable life. The truth being revealed was far more complex and dangerous than a simple abduction. And Emma Thompson, the caregiver, was now, unexpectedly, at the very heart of the hunt. The information Emma provided on Monday, the 23rd of October, acted as a powerful catalyst, galvanizing the stalled investigation into frantic, focused action. Detective Harding, now viewing Emma not as a compromised witness, but as an invaluable asset, moved swiftly. The federal task force specializing in human trafficking, initially a peripheral consulting body, took a more central role, their resources and reach extending far beyond what the local precinct could manage. The codename, the Curator, was no longer an abstract boogeyman. Emma's detailed recollections had given him a chillingly proximate presence. The first breakthrough came from the seemingly insignificant detail of the misaligned screen protector on the generic burner phone. Federal analysts, cross-referencing sales data of such phones and protectors from budget electronics stores within a 10-mile radius of the Parkers' home and Little Sprout's daycare, areas Miller likely surveilled, flagged a cash purchase made 3 weeks prior to Lily's abduction. The store's grainy CCTV footage, enhanced and scrutinized, showed a man matching Miller's general description: medium height, brown hair, though he wore a baseball cap pulled low, unremarkable features. Crucially, as he fumbled with the packaging of the screen protector just outside the store, the camera caught a glimpse of his hands, clean, well-kept, and he placed the newly purchased phone into a worn leather briefcase that bore a striking resemblance to the one Emma had described. He then entered a nondescript sedan, its license plate partially obscured, but providing enough characters for analysts to begin running permutations. Simultaneously, the information about the German-made fountain pen ink, previously a footnote in the Oregon cold case, now took on new significance. The task force began re-examining evidence from that abduction, searching for parallels with Miller's MO as detailed by Emma. The sterile smell of the briefcase lining prompted a search of known or suspected properties used by trafficking rings for temporary holding, places that might be chemically sanitized. They focused on properties with easy access to transit routes, mirroring the Daycare's proximity to the bus terminal and highway. By Tuesday afternoon, the 24th of October, the partial license plate from the electronics store CCTV, combined with traffic camera data, led them to a short-term rental property in an industrial-adjacent suburb, leased under a false name with untraceable payment methods. A surveillance team was dispatched immediately. The house was quiet, curtains drawn. There was no sign of Lily or Miller. Detective Harding requested Emma come to a temporary command post set up near the suspected house. "We might have found a location Miller used," Harding explained over the phone, her voice tight with anticipation and caution. "There's a chance he left something behind. Your eye for detail, it could be vital." Walking through the small, sparsely furnished rental house later that day, now cleared by a forensics team, felt like stepping into the ghost's lair. The air was faintly tinged with the same sterile, chemical scent Emma had recalled from the briefcase. In a waste bin in the kitchen, forensics found discarded packaging for children's snacks, a brand Lily particularly liked, a detail Sarah Parker had provided. Chillingly, they also found a small bundle of dark, heavy-duty zip ties, identical to the flat object Emma had fleetingly glimpsed, tucked into Miller's waistband. But the most significant find was in a hidden compartment within a closet. Several high-quality blank ID cards, the kind that could be easily printed with false information, a high-end portable card printer, and a small, almost empty bottle of the specific German fountain pen ink. Beside them lay a collection of cheap, synthetic wigs of various common hair colors and styles, and a makeup kit designed for subtle alterations of facial features. David Miller was indeed a meticulously crafted persona. Then, on a small table, partially hidden under a stack of local maps, was a seemingly innocuous tourist brochure for a regional scenic railway, its route heading north towards the Canadian border. A particular departure time for Wednesday, the 25th of October, the next day, was circled faintly in pencil. It wasn't the famous, heavily trafficked tourist train, but a lesser-known, more utilitarian line that made several stops in remote, sparsely populated areas. An ideal, low-surveillance method of travel. He wouldn't take her on a plane, not with an Amber Alert and her photo everywhere, Harding mused, staring at the brochure. This train, it's less direct, less obvious. The curator's network is known for using unconventional routes. The circled time was early morning. The decision was made to stake out the primary departure station and several smaller preceding whistle stops along the route. Emma, at her insistence, was allowed to be present at the main station with Harding, kept discreetly out of sight. Her role was simple, a final visual confirmation if they found someone matching Miller's description, perhaps in a slightly altered disguise. The dawn of Wednesday, the 25th of October, was cold and tense. The station bustled with early commuters and a few sleepy tourists. Emma sat with Harding in an unmarked car overlooking the platform, her gaze sweeping over every face. Hours crawled by. The departure time for the scenic railway approached. Just as a knot of despair began to tighten in Emma's chest, Harding's radio crackled. A spotter at a small rural stop 2 stations up the line had flagged a man with a young blonde girl. The man's appearance was slightly different. His hair was darker, almost black, and he wore glasses, but his height, build, and the way he held the child's hand, a little too firmly, matched. The train was held at that small station under a pretext. Officers, including federal agents, converged. Emma and Harding sped towards the location, sirens off until the last moment. When they arrived, the scene was controlled but intensely charged. A man, his face pale and his disguise now seeming flimsy under the harsh morning light, was in handcuffs, and there, being gently led away by a female officer, her face tear-streaked but physically unharmed, was Lily Parker. She clutched a new, unfamiliar teddy bear, but her eyes, wide and frightened, scanned the faces until they landed on Emma. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of recognition, of remembered safety, crossed Lily's face. "Miss Emma?" she whispered, her voice fragile. Tears Emma hadn't realized she was holding back streamed down her face. She nodded, unable to speak, her heart a chaotic mix of overwhelming relief and residual terror. The man, whose real name was later found to be Arthur Jennings, a former forger with links to several international crime syndicates, remained silent and uncooperative. He was, as suspected, an operative for the curator. The blank IDs, the untraceable briefcase, found with him still smelling faintly of chemicals, the burner phones, it was all part of his tradecraft. He was meant to hand Lily off to another operative further up the line, who would then facilitate her movement across the border. The reunion between Lily and her parents later that day was a raw, emotional scene that Emma witnessed from a respectful distance. Sarah Parker's anguished cries were replaced with sobs of profound relief as she enveloped Lily in a desperate hug. Mark Parker, his face etched with gratitude, simply gripped Emma's hand, his eyes conveying what words could not. The truth about David Miller had been exposed, his identity stripped away. Lily was safe. For Emma, the journey had been harrowing. The guilt would likely never fully disappear, but it was now tempered by the knowledge that her instincts, however delayed in their full realization, and her meticulous attention to the smallest details, had played a crucial role in bringing Lily home. Little Sprout's daycare eventually reopened, with enhanced security protocols. Emma, after a period of recovery, was offered her position back. She accepted. Her first day back was filled with trepidation, but also with a renewed, if forever changed, sense of purpose. The broader network of the curator remained a shadowy entity, a fight for another day, another team of investigators. But one of its operatives had been caught. One child had been saved from its clutches. And in a world where vigilance often felt like a losing battle, the caregiver's instinct, sharpened by trauma and a relentless pursuit of truth, had, for a precious moment, tipped the scales. The happy ending was Lily's safe return. The more open, realistic ending was the ongoing battle against the darkness she had briefly touched. But for Emma Thompson, watching Lily later that week tentatively rejoin her friends in the daycare playground, her laughter a fragile but healing melody, it was enough. The memory of the fountain pen, the briefcase, and the misaligned screen protector would forever be a reminder of a terrible failure, but also of an unlikely, hard-won redemption.